fight fans, ready up for round two here. This is MMA Fight Night live. I have the honor of being your host. My name is Nick Peralta. As mentioned before, I'm more prominently featured on the Facebook page, but of course, I will be co-hosted here with the founder of MMA Fight Night Live, Joe Devlin. Joe, what's up, man?
Not much, man. Just getting settled down after a long week of fights. 3 fights, 8 days. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, so much fun. I had a blast. There was a lot to go through. These last 2 fight night cards were actually really good, I thought. The Wednesdays was dragging a little bit, and then it got better as the night went on. And then I felt like this last card was, solid throughout. But we got a lot to talk about, definitely, in regards to the main event from Wednesday, and then we'll talk more about this past Saturday's card. First off, we're going to talk about Anthony Smith versus Glover Teixeira. That was a much better fight than I was expecting. I mean, I was thinking it'd be a decent fight just on paper. It's a fun matchup. Those guys are decent strikers, but they have underrated ground games. But man, it became a wild knock 'em off type of brawl on the feet. And that turned more technical as the fight went on from Glover Teixeira. But I was very impressed with Glover's heart, his chin held together. He was hurt early on and, had to play catch up as the fight progressed and was able to do so. Was able to outlast Anthony Smith to garner the 5th round TKO stoppage. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of controversy there based on why the fight wasn't stopped sooner. It seemed like Smith had endured some injuries as the fight went on and could have been stopped in round 4. Some people even arguing in round 3. But overall, the result being Glover Teixeira gets the TKO round 5. We'll get on to what that means later on. But Joe, what did you think of that finish?
It's like everyone else. It was real late. The referee could have stopped it early. Jason Herzog, he came out on social media yesterday, I believe it was, or maybe the day before, and was taking ownership for the stoppage, saying that it's up to him to kind of make sure that the fighters are safe and that it's fully on him that the fight went on as long as it did. But, Smith's corner in between rounds 4 and 5, when Smith went back and was telling like his teeth are loose or they were knocked out, I can't remember which, he was, there's kind of like, they always say like, when a fighter can no longer defend himself to stop the fight. I think it's a little bit more than that. When it gets to a point in the fight where, in this case, Glover Teixeira is moving forward and he's throwing bombs, and everything he's landing is backing up Anthony Smith, and everything Anthony Smith throws in return is like, you can't even harm a fly. Like there's no power behind it. There's no pop behind the shots. Glover's just walking through it. If you're the referee or the corner at that point, you got to take a look, because in my opinion, starting from there, your fighter can no longer defend himself. So that every shot that he eats, he can't return fire and back up Teixeira. They really need to start taking that into consideration. I really think that fight should have been stopped, if not earlier in the 5th, at least in the 4th or in between the 4th and 5th. I believe Smith had a broken orbital bone, a broken nose, suffered a couple other injuries. Oh yeah, the teeth. Yeah, the one in the front, one in the back. So I mean, all that was really unnecessary.
Turned him into a pirate.
Yeah, all that you can really hope for is that Smith, heals from the injuries, gets back in there, has a good showing, but just wasn't his night at all.
Yeah, well, he started off strong. Like he started off landing well and backing Glover up and was getting the better of him in the exchanges. Glover hung in there though, man, was able to come back late in round 2 and start showing like some more pop on the feet, and then got it to the ground and dominated there. Yeah. And with the work on the ground that he did, he tired Smith out. And then by that point, he was an easy target for Glover's pretty solid boxing.
Yeah.
I liked the fight. I thought it was a great, fun fight. I thought all the main events were great. And we'll get to this past Saturday's main event here soon. But where does this mean for Glover, and where does he fit into what's now starting to become a crowded, middleweight title or light heavyweight title picture?
Yeah, it's tricky. You have Jones there at the top of the mountain like he always is. Jones is kind of teasing a move to heavyweight with Francis, obviously, but let's assume he stays at light heavyweight. You have a number of people clamoring for the Reyes rematch. You have Jan Blachowicz, who's the only guy in the top 5 or top 7 or so that he hasn't beaten. So that would be a new challenge. And then you got Maheta, who's come back. And like people forget how competitive the Thiago Santos fight was. And he did it on on no knees, essentially. And he took Jones to the brink. So if you are Glover, you have to understand you're behind those three guys. So if Jones stays at light heavyweight, and let's say he takes the Reyes rematch, then I think that Glover's best chance is to get in there with Maheta or Blachowicz and try and insert him as the next man up. But he's going to need another win for sure, and he's going to also need Jones to stay in the light heavyweight division. So two different things that have to happen.
Well, if Jones were to leave the division, that opens the division up for, the obviously two names, which I would imagine would be Reyes and Jan. That just makes the most sense. And so he would still be in a position where he needs another fight. Him versus Santos sounds fun, though. I think that's a real fun fight. Any fight for Santos is fun. And Glover has shown that, even this late in his career, he's still got enough for one good title push. And so it's going to be interesting to see just how far he can go. I think let's assume also that Jones, like I said, leaves the division. That leaves it open for Dom and Jan to fight for the title, and maybe Glover and Thiago Santos to fight for the runner-up there, who fights the next champion.
No one's angry at that.
Yeah. And while no one would ever proclaim the next champion as the best heavyweight champion by any margin for a long stretch of time, I feel like it would kind of excite things. And then if he does move to heavyweight, it makes things very exciting. But for right now, it's all speculation. But if it ever becomes true, we'll definitely get back on here and talk more about that. We'll move on to the Saturday's card. This Saturday was a fantastic card. I had a very hard time not liking almost every fight. There's like one or two here that I just was whatever about. Otherwise, the fight card was great from start to finish. You had Rodrigo Nascimento come back on Don'Tale Mayes and utilize that his grappling to get it down, get the submission. You had Courtney Casey, who nearly broke Mara Barella's arm. That was a great finish. And oh my God, we had one of the bloodiest fights I've seen easily this year, but in years that I've seen with Nate Landwehr versus Darren Elkins, and Darren Elkins displaying probably the gold standard of toughness to get through what was undoubtedly one of the more gruesome injuries on the forehead that led to such a bloody mess of a face. That was a great fight. I could keep going on. Giga, who took a fight on short notice against a real game bantamweight fighter, and Irwin Rivera, who moved up to featherweight on 1 day's notice to fight for the UFC, made his debut. I'm sure we'll see him again just based on how he was fighting. He's, definitely fighting in an exciting manner. Kevin Holland beat Anthony Hernandez, and Miguel Baeza defeated Matt Brown. There are a few names here that I want to pluck out, but of the prelims, which one stood out the most to you, and which finish got you most excited?
They were all so good. The two off the top of my head that I probably liked the most was the Baeza fight, and I would say the Ledware and the Holland, they're both good too. It's really hard to rank them, but the Baeza fight I liked only because he was up against a real vet. He was really hurt early. You saw that shot when he was up against the cage, got dropped by Matt Brown, mouthpiece came flying out. To be that young into the game, to have that composure, to come back strong in round 2 and then put Matt Brown's lights out. That was really impressive. I know Matt Brown doesn't have the chin that he used to, but even still coming back from that adversity was really solid. And then you look at Kevin Holland, how he just ran through Anthony Hernandez. He's someone to really keep an eye on. He has a real fun skill set every time he fights, and I know it's very few, but every time we've seen him, it's been real interesting, real fun. So he's got a ways to go in his development, but I would say those two were the most impressive. Nate Landwehr for sure was fantastic, but Darren Elkins also has a habit of kind of getting into these blood and gut fights. So it's great that Landwehr stood up to that test, but beating Darren Elkins now isn't the same as beating him maybe a couple years ago. And I know that's kind of true in the Matt Brown fight as well, but Baeza really showed me a lot because he was really facing some adversity early. So those were kind of my picks as to which fighter stood out to me most on the prelims.
Yeah, I had a fun time with all of them, but if I had to pick who most impressed me, it definitely was Baeza. Caramel Thunder I love that nickname. That's a great nickname. He showed so much in that fight. He showed toughness. He showed surprising experience in being able to be put in a bad position and work his way out of it and come back and win. That, and against a guy like Matt Brown, who's so like he's a pressure-based fighter. He comes after you. He doesn't get out of your face. He's trying to put you away. He's mean. He's aggressive, and everything that he does in there, he's trying to just sap your spirit. And Baeza stayed composed in there. Worked great technique on the feet. And I was even saying it too, as with the people that I was watching with. His corner told him, look for him to charge forward on you, and when he does, I got to keep that left hand counter strong. And right there, sure enough, followed his corners and boom, the left lead hook drop, and then finished up with good ground and pound. So he showed good finishing ability as well, and he's only 27, 9-0, young guy. I'm very excited to see where he goes from here. Definitely the guy who impressed me the most on the prelims. And then so on the main card, we had a lot of great fights too, mostly decisions, but they were great fights. But one of the highest points of contention for this entire card was the judging. There were a lot of decisions on this card that a lot of people had, a lot of fans had, were disputing. Especially if you look on MMA decisions, we tend to look at those, and you would see that for the majority of the decisions, if not all of them, I believe, the loser actually was favored by media and fans. So it's very interesting to see that. And I was considering thinking like, wow, the Florida Commission's going to have a problem. But I was realizing that most of the judges were brought in out of state. So it's not that. But I am interested to see what you thought of these decisions. Which one did you think was probably the most egregious towards the loser?
I don't think that. So first of all, I don't think there were any robberies on Saturday. I think that they were. We're talking about the three fights. We're talking about Barboza Ige. We're talking about Marlon Vera and Yadong Song, and we're talking about Angela Hill and Claudia Gadelha. I don't think any of them were robberies. I think all three of them were actually a lot closer than people give them credit for. I think that of the three, the one that I was most surprised in was the Angela Hill Claudia Gadelha fight. I did see the stats after the fact, and sometimes when you see the stats, it kind of changes your mind a little bit. But I really felt that Angela Hill really turned the tide of that fight and made it an Angela Hill type fight. Claudia Gadelha keeps talking about her new boxing skills with Mark Henry. You know what I mean? And she's been going on and about for the last couple of fights. And I just don't see it. I really think Claudia's best bet is going back to a grappling-based approach, especially against someone like Hill, who's had trouble with grapplers in the past. I actually picked Hill to win the fight before it started because I knew Gadelha was going to try her stand-up like she did with Esparza. And I just don't think it's all that great. It's not bad. But, against a 99.9% someone, who wants to just strike all the time, I just don't think it's a great approach to the fight. So I thought Hill won that. I thought that both the Barboza Ige as well as the Marlon Vera Song Yadong fights were real close. I had trouble. I did pick Vera. The Barboza Ige fight, I didn't know what to do. I was real split on that. So that's how I saw those three. And then, of course, Joko easily beat Anders. And we'll get to the main event later. How did you see it?
I was very surprised with the Edson Barboza Dan Ige one. That one got to me. I thought that was probably the most egregious one. I felt the most confident of those three decisions. By the time it hit the scorecards as they were being read, I thought Barboza for sure. And I was most shocked with that one. And then I look at the stats and I believe that my thoughts on that were warranted. I felt, if you look at it, Barboza had more significant strikes and he dropped Ige. It just seemed like it was one of those fights where I thought Barboza did enough handily to win. But at the same time, Ige brought it, man. He brought a fun fight. It was a good fight because it was competitive for sure. My perception of it was each round that I believe I gave Ige one round, probably. I can't remember which round it was.
Probably two.
Yeah, probably two. But I thought the rounds that, Barboza, I thought he won. I thought he won handily. It was no me thinking like, oh, okay, Ige might have nailed that, might have gotten it back. No, I thought that Barboza handily took 2 rounds and should have gotten the decision there. That one got me. But the Angela Hill Gadelha one, like you said, you look at the stats on that one. you can maybe be forgiven for that one, for how that one went. But again, you had Angela Hill drop her in the second round. That's when she started to really come back in the fight. And I thought she did enough in the third round to take it as well. So that's 2-1. But obviously, Gadelha actually did utilize her grappling in the first round. And I was thinking like, okay, well, she's obviously now got the means to victory. She just needs to get it to the ground, and she now knows she can control her down there. So I was surprised that Claudia didn't go back to that. And so good call on you for knowing that that's probably something she was going to stick to mostly in this fight. But obviously, I mean, she got the win ultimately. So, but like, had she lost, that probably would have been a big talking point as to why. She could have gotten it down and maybe won the fight. And then with Song Yadong and Vera, first of all, there's a lot going into that. It's difficult, and I feel for Vera. I'm biased because I'm Ecuadorian, so I'm a big fan of the man. But first of all, this was a featherweight fight. He's a bantamweight, and this was made a featherweight fight because Vera was supposed to fight Eddie Wineland. And of course, obviously, because of the COVID-19 thing happening, Eddie Wineland was not able to make this fight. Instead, Song Yadong got the call up, and they made it a featherweight bout for its short notice stat. And so I wonder how much, especially in the week, like Vera didn't even know if he was going to fight him or a Urijah Faber that was heavily overweight. There's a lot going into this fight. But come fight time, well, you know what? I don't mean to be mean, but what I thought was hilarious was, hashtag Fat Faber started trending for a little bit there, just for like a little bit. And I was like, oh no, Fat Faber's going to come in here and just break the hype. And that was funny. And it's an interesting story. If anybody watching cares to go and watch Urijah Faber's press conference interview from this past weekend. But that one was also close. But another case of where I felt, Song won the first and then Vera took over from there. But yeah, just a lot of decisions, a lot of close fights. Like you said, it's hard to say someone got robbed. Like even though I thought Vera won, even though I thought Angela Hill won, I did also think that the closest thing that came to a robbery for me was Barboza. But like you said, it's hard to claim robbery. It's hard to claim that for any of these fights. But and they were exciting, fun fights. When they're back and forth like that, sometimes it's hard to just like keep in mind that it's hard to score a fight when you're looking at it and thinking, okay, he won this round or this round based on so much happening, especially when it's such an action-packed round or fight overall. So, and I think it just speaks to how good this card was. And if anybody hasn't had the chance to watch it, go on ESPN, check that out. It was a great fight, great fights overall. We now move to the main event of the card, which, was a huge story for even before, this whole fight week started. Even before 249 was Walt Harris returning after the tragedy that he and his family had to endure. It was covered heavily. So obviously, I'm sure anybody watching this knows the story. Walt Harris coming back after, family tragedy, losing his daughter. And so I was making the argument that this seemed too soon, but he was of the mind that this was the time to do it. And even if it was too soon, I was thinking this is not the man to come back and fight off of a long layoff, off of this having happened. Who knows where you're at mentally? Even I wonder if even he knew where he was going to be at mentally the second the fight started. But the fight started. He looked great in the first round. Dropped Alistair. Arguably got himself a little tuckered out there, and Alistair was able to reverse the position, get top position, land a few punches, maybe even arguably take the round back. Not on my scorecard, but you could be forgiven for thinking that. And then, of course, Alistair Overeem would take advantage of an exhausted Walt Harris and get the TKO finish midway through the round. I thought Walt looked great. Certainly not a performance that he has to hang his head about. He hurt one of the most decorated fighters to ever compete, a man who has literally 5 times the fight experience he has, maybe even more. And he looked decent. He looked solid. And to come back from the tragedy that he did and have that kind of performance, win, lose, or draw, I think we should all definitely take a bow to the man. What did you think of the fight?
Yeah, I mean, It's so funny because going in, kind of everyone's pulling for Walt Harris. It's got to be weird if you're Alistair Overeem, and it's not like people don't like you. It's just that like they don't want you to win this fight because of the, what happened in Walt Harris's life. Like you, I thought Walt got off to a great start. He dropped Overeem, but when he and I can't remember the exact sequence of events, but when he kind of chased after him and went for a punch, and it was either Overeem either shrugged him off or either Harris swung and missed and kind of got turned around. But as soon as it hit the mat, it was just over.
The front kick. Yeah, he threw like a front kick looking type kick.
Yeah, and he missed, and Overeem kind of circled away, and then Walt Harris kind of went into the fence. And, it kind of reminded me, and not immediately, but after the fight was over, reminded me of when Weidman went for the spinning heel kick on Rockhold and missed, and then he got taken
spinning
down.
Back fist, or the spinning back fist from Chael against Anderson.
Silva, yeah. It's one of those, not that Walt Harris, that was like a go for broke move, but like he got real aggressive. He really smelled blood and he went for the kill. And as soon as that happened, you saw all the trouble he had on his back. And when they went back into their corners, I was waiting to hear what Overeem's coach would say. And he said, you're doing good to stand up, da-da-da-da-da. And then at the end, he's like, you see, I can't remember the exact word, but he said, like, you see how easy it was to take him down and to control him on the ground, right? Let's do that again. That's what he told Overeem. And then it was not even a minute into the second round. And, you could tell, as soon as it hit the mat, Walt just had nothing for Overeem on the mat at all. People forget, because Overeem's such a great knockout artist, that he has really, really good submissions and he's super strong. And having a 260-pound guy on top of you that has 20 plus years of experience is not a lot of fun when Walt Harris is still very new to the game and hasn't rounded out his game quite yet. So, it was unfortunate that Walt couldn't pick up the victory. Like you said, it was a real tough ask, being that Overeem is no slouch, no pushover. But at the same time, I kind of felt happy that Walt kind of got that out of his system. You figure all the emotion that goes into the fight week and the fight itself. And I feel that now that that fight is over and past him, he could probably move on and kind of not have that spotlight on him, all that pressure on him, because now that first fight's out of the way. So I do think he'll be able to rebound nicely, but just unfortunate he couldn't get it done on Saturday night.
Yeah, and what do you think, Walt? First of all, do you think Walt should have maybe fought somebody different?
Well, I mean,
not even take the result out of the occasion.
Yeah.
Even going into the fight, this is what I said.
I think that I think he said that he knew about that fight being made or potentially made as early as November last year. The fight was
they were scheduled.
Yeah, they were scheduled for April to headline the Portland card. That, of course, got canceled. So, I mean, he had lots of notice. It wasn't a lack of training. If you look at the fights he had leading up to that point, it kind of put him in the position to take this fight. In reality, heavyweight is very top heavy, and there's kind of the haves and the have-nots. And if you want to break into the haves, you have to beat someone like an Overeem, someone that's, at this point, better than a gatekeeper, but is definitely your way to get into that title contention. So, I mean, you could argue that maybe it was a little too early for Walt to be, barking up that tree. But at the same time, it seems like that was his plan even before the loss of his daughter. So, I mean, I really don't have any problem with the fight. I really believe that losses help you get better. He didn't take an unnecessary-ish amount of damage. And I'm curious to see what fight he takes next and where he goes.
Yeah, same. And, that was the biggest thing, I think. Like, the fact that it was the main event, I think, is also why this got as much attention as it did regarding his situation. I'm sure it would have gotten a lot of attention no matter who he was fighting, but the fact that it was a main event fight during this pandemic against a guy like Overeem, a ranked fighter, a former title contender. If I was managing Walt Harris, I would have tried to negotiate a different type of fight for him, something where, all of this pressure isn't on him. There is as much pressure as you could have laid on this man coming off of a tragedy like that, in my opinion. But like I said, he had a great performance. He just lost. You know what I mean? He got tired. I mean, there were obviously things he needs to fix and work on, and this fight showed that. But it showed us also that he's still very much a possible contender in this fight. However, he's an older man. He's 36 years old. Who knows? But I mean, heavyweights tend to be older. It's kind of weird. the lifespan that these guys have. But just looking at that on paper, it's hard to say like his trajectory isn't limited based on his age. So I wonder, where he goes from here, who he fights next. And yeah, I hope he gets a solid name that's not too, crazy. There's a lot you could do with the man. And so I'm interested in seeing who he fights next, where he goes from here. If we had time, we would also discuss, there's also kind of that looming thing now where this past week has happened and we've had many heavyweights fight. We had Francis Ngannou with his knockout. We had Ben Rothwell win and now you have a guy like Alistair Overeem. And these are guys all clamoring for a shot at the title, knowing that there's a lot going on there, but that's a discussion for another day. We should definitely try and work on a show where we just talk about the heavyweight division, because there's a lot to talk about, and especially when you include John Jones, who's throwing his name out there for a heavyweight fight. But we'll do that for another day. This has been an amazing fight week for you, Joe. I think has been the highlight of these events. And what do you think about the fact that they did these 3 events during this pandemic? It seems like it was a success. Very little controversy. Obviously the Jacare thing happened, and that kind of threw up some red flags, and we were all wondering like, oh no, what's going to happen? But it seems like they kind of got out of this week without much issue after that.
Yeah, I mean, everything told. You take away the Jacare situation with 2 of his cornermen. That's really the only, downside of the week we had so far. You hope that once the guys get back to their homes and they kind of go back to their normal lives, that no one, ends up with any symptoms. But it seems like they did a decent amount of testing while in Jacksonville. So all in all, I'd say it's a win. In terms of, who was the biggest winner of the week, I think it has to be Justin Gaethje. I think that's a bit of a no-brainer. Kind of leapfrogging Tony Ferguson, who's been in that number 1 contender spot for years. He's now the first man to beat Tony Ferguson since, Michael Johnson did it, 9 years ago or so, and did it like convincingly. Like that fight was never, outside of that uppercut at the end of round 2, that fight was never, ever, 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 ever in question. And Tony Ferguson is my favorite fighter. Justin Gaethje's not far behind. So watching that was real weird, but I was extremely impressed by Justin Gaethje. I'm very curious to see how he does now against the potential matchup with Khabib. I don't want to say it's going to happen yet, because we said that with Tony year after year and it didn't happen. But I am really looking forward to a Khabib Justin matchup. I believe Khabib said as early as September he'd be ready. So, if we could schedule that sometime in the fall, that would be great. You think about Khabib's wrestling, Justin's great defensive wrestling ability. Justin obviously hits like a truck. Khabib on the feet, while improved, is not great. So if Justin can find a way to keep this standing, which I'm not sure he can, but if he can, I'm very curious to see how that plays out. Yeah, I'm worried. Okay. So I'm worried about Justin keeping it standing. I think that he can kind of fight off a takedown or 2, but if Khabib's just spamming him with takedowns, I'm a little bit worried about him continuously stuffing. And I also believe that as good of a defensive wrestler Justin is, we've had it happen in past where these guys, once they get on their back, they're not accustomed to being in that position. And I believe someone from Justin's camp, or maybe one of the broadcast people on last Saturday night, talked about Justin. He hasn't even really practiced wrestling in a couple of years, right? Because he fights primarily on the feet. The wrestling, he kind of just doesn't worry about nearly as much. Now, I'm sure he'll practice wrestling for a Khabib fight. I know that for sure. But my fear is if Khabib,
he's got a unitard on, he's got a singlet on right now in the gym. No way, he's not already training.
He better. So my only fear is if he gets down, can he get back up? And if he gets back up, how much does it take out of him? Because Gaethje, although he has better endurance as of late, we haven't seen him constantly having to work like we did in those Alvarez and Poirier fights. So I want to see what happens when he's kind of dragged into deeper water, and if he's going to have the stamina to stuff the takedowns and deliver hard punches. I'm not sold on that yet, and that's kind of where I am.
I like it. No, great week of fights. I think the UFC can call this a win. Hopefully soon here we'll talk about all the many different aspects of the sport that are going on outside of the fights themselves. But we do have a potential May 30th card. I'm sure it's coming up here soon if they're not already doing it, talking about the fights that they're going to add to that card, as well as the location. And when that happens, we'll go ahead and get to talking about that. We have other topics to discuss, though, moving forward. So keep an eye out for us here on MMA Fight Night Live, Joe. Fun as always. And make sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, if you're not already on all three of those. Fight fans, we'd love to hear your comments. If you have any questions, we'll definitely be sure to get to those in the comments below as well. Thanks so much, guys. And Joe, good hearing from you, brother.
Same with you, brother. Stay safe.